What's going on, y'all? Just Haley here, and I am back again with another video. Now, today's video is going to be another Oraxia video, and you already probably know that I love the Spider Dami Mommy. She is so much fun. The Mommy Silkers go hard, and I really enjoy the way she plays. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of Mirage, so the inspiration of this build was what if I could do Mirage, but in a way, better. Accentuating all the summoner capabilities that she has, but making them a little bit more in tune with what she can do really well, while also just really capitalizing on the weapon platform capabilities she has, and seeing how greedy I can get while sacrificing a bunch of the survivability and still be able to do things like EDA, ETA very easily, and go into longer void survival, stuff like that, just to show you how tanky she can be. Overall, really effective build, and I absolutely love the way it plays. If you do too, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. It helps me out a ton. I love seeing the growth on the channel. Aside from that, let's get right into the build video because I do want to show you everything that this can do. So let's start this the way that we always do with Subsumes. For Oraxia, there are two Subsumes that I really like, and those two Subsumes are Nourish and Nullstar. We'll get into Nullstar in a second, but I want to talk about Nourish first. It's a very aggressive Subsume that I know we all probably hate at this point because of how overused it is. It helps give her more energy, which is going to feel really nice, especially if you keep the Mercy's Kiss. It means that even if you end up going low because you're not paying attention, it's a nice little oops, and then you get all your energy back. Makes it very hard to run out of energy because you're getting all the extra multiplicative energy back. It also gives you the ability for whenever you take damage. With the build we're running, about 17 meters is going to be hit with a viral damage explosion, which is nice too. All of this is really cool and would be fine by itself, but then you add in the extra damage she gives herself, which feels really nice, especially because you can use it with her 4, which feels really cool. And then even beyond that, she buffs up not just her Sentinel, but also her Scuttlers with more viral damage, so they're doing more damage, which is really cool. And it's going to help create those contagious bond cascades that we love to see from the Sentinel, while also enabling the Scuttlers to prime viral from enemies, which is really cool. So you can put viral on enemies. You're also going to be giving yourself the damage multiplication that she normally can't use on enemies that can't be CC'd. That's going to include things like Necromex, things like Acolytes, or any enemy with Overguard, amongst others. What that means is that normally her webs, while they would be a great source of damage vulnerability, especially with high strength, they're not going to be able to give you damage vulnerability on the things you really want damage vulnerability on. Why is that bad? Well, it's bad because I don't really need damage vulnerability for the fodder enemies, for the general enemies. I need damage vulnerability, or want damage vulnerability, for enemies that are a little bit tankier and a little bit harder to put down. Because the effect of the web doesn't work on that, webbed embrace doesn't work on that, overall it loses a lot of its effectiveness, and to me just kind of gets outclassed by something like Nourish. Nullstar is the other option. It gives you a little bit of damage, a lot of bit of damage reduction, and overall works really well with her kit, amplifying that damage over time that she can do. It's not my favorite option, but it is really good for survivability, so if you're looking for something for a little bit more long-term missions, maybe going level cap, maybe consider Nullstar here. But let's get into the first build and the Nourish build for that aggressive option first. So the first thing you're going to notice with this build is we are using Summoner's Wrath. That is going to enable not only the Murderous Sentinel setup that I love running on this, but also it's going to empower our Scuttlers to be even stronger. Scuttlers currently aren't benefiting from Arcane Shards, but they will hopefully in the future. Once that happens, this build is going to get even stronger, even more powerful, and it's going to feel really fun to use. Combining all of that with a ton of strength, Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, the double Umbra setup to give us a 55% on that Intensify, and then a really greedy Arcane setup of Bellicose, Augmented. Now we're not going to snapshot quite as high on our health multiplier with this, but we will get all the value from that strength when we transform, because currently the strength is live updating to whatever her strength is after she transformed. Instead of that, we can use things like Power Drain, we can use things like Materai, or even the Grimoire buff to buff up the health multiplier, because that will snapshot off of your power strength when you cast, so keep that in mind. The other thing that we're going to be doing is again using that Nourish that we subsumed on to buff up our Brood. That's going to allow them to spread viral for us, which is very important because it's going to spread out a ton of extra damage because they're also getting the extra damage buff from Nourish. And then we also get the 17-meter explosion of viral priming whenever enemies damage us. All of this combines to make a very strong build that's going to not ever lack damage. It's just going to hit very, very hard, very consistently, very evenly. And then we get all of our range that we would need from Cunning Drift and Augur Reach. I like the Augur mod because it helps me get some shields back whenever I cast abilities. Just helps a little bit with that tanking, just in case. And I especially like it whenever there's an Acolyte that spawns, though I personally recommend for Acolytes, just make sure you carry a melee that has a really nice heavy attack, run Crescendo on it, it's very easy, or use a quick wall latch, go invisible after the Acolyte spawns, and any melee should be able to just shred through them pretty quickly. Even Violence, though Violence, again, I still just recommend that quick heavy attack. It's gonna feel really nice. If Malice spawns, make sure you don't accidentally unalive yourself, because that always feels kind of embarrassing. Prime Blow answers our energy need here more than anything else, especially if you're combining it with Mercy's Kiss, though if you wanted to go for efficiency, potentially drop the Nourish off and take that over the Mercy's Kiss instead, keeping the two. You could do that if you wanted to here, and then that would be okay, though personally I'm probably dropping Blind Rage if I do that, and I think she scales way too hard off of strength to make that a justifiable option. The other really big option I want to talk about is Aegis over Augmented. Again, I wanted to make a very greedy build here, but if you wanted to go for Aegis, it is exceptionally strong, though honestly, I never felt like I needed it on her, especially in the content that's typical. But if you're doing something more endurance-y and wanted to use this build, you could do it if you ran Aegis and just hope that that procs. It's not that hard to proc it as long as you're just constantly casting, going invisible, stuff like that. It's pretty simple. You can aggro juggle really easily as well. Now, what is aggro tanking? Aggro tanking is a concept that I'm coining with Oraxia because she can summon 10 minions very easily. Now this is something that Necros can also do in getting extra minions on the field. What's going to happen though with Oraxia is that her minions don't take damage, as opposed to people like Caliban or people like Necros. When you're using those frames, the summons can take damage and be killed by enemies. What that means is that they can aggro tank, but not quite as effectively as what Oraxia can do, because not only is she putting out 10 or more if you get multiple enemies to explode at the same time, all marked, you'll get even more. She's going to get all of that while they're also dishing out damage, and then they're all going to be distracting enemies, pulling aggro away from you. Think about it like this. If you've ever been in a mission with multiple other teammates, those missions tend to be a little bit easier from a survivability standpoint. It won't always be just because someone else is killing the enemies for you. A lot of the times that happens to be because enemies are spread out, they're focusing on different targets, they're not all shooting you. If you've played someone like Mirage, you also know that the clones can take aggro too. So an enemy that comes up and tries to melee you will instead melee a clone, and you won't take that damage. Now this doesn't work on Mirage when you have things like Bombard shooting rockets and hitting feet, or just going through the clone and hitting you, but it does work on Oraxia because they are hitting clones instead of you. This happens throughout the gameplay, and as long as you upkeep your scuttlers, pretty much any enemy that isn't specifically targeting you, very specifically if we're looking at someone like a Acolyte whenever they might spawn, those are the enemies you kind of have to worry about. Outside of that, the aggro being spread around to multiple other sources and an independent pet, if you choose that, all works in her favor to make her very tanky, even without juggling invisibility and managing anything else. You don't need Aegis. The health pool on top of adaptation was more than enough for me. You could even potentially sacrifice adaptation if you didn't care about it and just lose that little bit of lair and not really care that much, because that's what I did initially in the EDA that I took her to. It was very simple. I was never in any danger, and it was very, very comfortable. Now, all of this said, obviously this isn't going to be end-all be-all. Adding other layers of survivability is going to feel good, but a Murderous Sentinel setup will give you damage cascades that scale literally infinitely with enemy density, and then you will also have the ability to have your scuttlers doing whatever they're doing as well. This combination is incredibly powerful, and it means Summoner's Wrath is just really, really strong on her. Though it does pull the focus away from her build in general, I actually think it's a really strong setup, especially if you're running Nourish, because effectively the way Summoner's Wrath combines with Nourish is you're now giving a Nourish buff with a huge strength, by the way, on top of a 75% roar buff to all of your summons and your Sentinel. It would just be kind of silly not to run it, in my opinion, but obviously we don't want to rely on it, and we don't need to for things like Circuit and stuff like that where we don't get pets. We're still getting the benefit of Summoner's Wrath into our scuttlers, and that's really, really strong by itself. So aggro tanking out of the way, Oraxia has a lot of ways to also mitigate damage, like her stealth. She can also add in a ton of health, which is why I run that adaptation and the double setup for the Umbra with Intensify and Vitality. Meanwhile, she doesn't have a lot of armor, so instead of running something like the full armor shards that I was running previously, I opted instead for running an almost full green setup for extra toxin damage. That's going to look a little something like this. Now that's going to give us an extra 180% multiplicative toxin damage increase for all the toxin damage effects, which by the way are forced from her 4. This is really strong by itself, and then when you combine that with any type of AoE weapon that can prime things, say for example, maybe my favorite secondary in the game, the Epitaph, you're getting tons of toxin damage that is going to absolutely rip through enemies very easily. You're combining that with your Nourish to make sure that that's going through, and then modding your weapons very effectively for whatever else might be needed. Things like Corrosive to help armor strip are also going to feel really fair, so you're not going to lack for survivability due to things like Aggro Tanking, but also just in general because you're doing so much damage that enemies are going to have a hard time staying alive. I decided to include this little bit of a clip from the simulacrum, though I do want to very much specify this is not just a simulacrum build. It thrives on enemy density. The more enemies, the better the build, but you can take it to any mission and pretty much run it the same way that I run Mirage. So I love it in bounty missions. I love it in shorter missions. I love it in things like Lich Hunts and stuff like that too. All of it just feels really good, really comfortable, and you can see that even here, you're not always the focus, and when you're not the main focus, it's just so easy to stay alive, it's not even funny. Now I do briefly want to talk about this other build option that I have, and that is the Nullstar build. The Nullstar build is really fun because if you didn't know, any enemy that is killed by Oraxia while she's in her 4 will prime the AoE toxin explosion that her 4 offers. What that means is you are going to prime with Nullstar and the Augment, Heat, Blast, and Toxin all in an AoE whenever you get kills and whenever you're doing anything. You can juggle aggro very easily by just staying on walls, but in this case, you get 75% damage reduction constantly from Nullstar whenever you recast it as well. Combining all of this with everything else she's doing, you're getting all the same survivability and then some, pretty much. Obviously, it doesn't go up to that 90% from adaptation, but we don't really care. 75 is more than enough. If you want to swap any of the Arcanes out, I personally would recommend swapping off Augmented and instead run Aegis. It's going to be very, very strong here because the damage reduction is going to make it thrive. But the overall AoE and destruction from this build works really well, and it's what I would use more for an endurance type, maybe level cap build. It's going to work really well. The overall effect should just end up scaling really, really hard for you. It's not my preferred way to play. I do like the greed of Nourish, and that makes the Scuttlers feel really nice. But if you wanted to run something like this, you could. Again, just make sure you're keeping your Scuttlers out, and you're going to be good to go. You can even do all of this while you are wall latched, so it does feel really, really nice for the overall kit synergy with Oraxia. And again, if you wanted to put it over Mercy's Kiss instead, I understand. I don't recommend it, but I do understand. Now I have talked a few different times about the Murderous Sentinel setup. Here that is. Now that on this case, I'm actually running a Nautilus setup. I normally run Taxon, but I know Taxon's not an investment everyone wants to make, so I just wanted to show you can run it on any build you want to. Now for the Vergless setup, I'm still running the same Vergless that I've always run. I really like it. It's set up here. I'm going to start looking for a Riven for it, but it's not needed at all for the same damage cascades. If you want, you can swap the Serration for a Smite mod and just use a faction mod there. That's going to work fine, and it's going to do everything that you want, and it's going to amplify the damage even further. We typically don't need it, but if you wanted to do it, you certainly could. The footage here, even though we're hitting damage cap with those cascades that we're doing, was done with the Serration as well, so really run whatever you want, but they use the same polarity, so it doesn't matter. The other thing I'm using in this build is the Convectrix, which actually started out as a little bit of a meme, but it ended up being a lot of fun. It applies a ton of statuses and hits a ton, which means it amplifies off of the forced toxins. Here's the build that I'm running on my Convectrix. Overall, it's just meant to apply as many statuses as I can. Crux combines with the Augment as well, and that's really cool. If you don't know what the Riven is, I'm running a basic -slash, increased status duration, plus fire rate, no roll Riven. Honestly, running multi-shot and fire rate would be better, but I thought it was pretty funny for the -slash to make sure that I was weighting higher into the heat that I was priming, so it was pretty fun. and it helped create some really ridiculous, really fun cascades. If you want to run something like that, it's really cool. Now, I do recommend not running two beamy type spammy weapons on her. Run one thing for hard hitting, one thing for beams if you want to do something like that. But sometimes we can't control that, so modding things up to be able to use them in circuit and stuff like that is always an option, and that's what I kind of go for here. And then again, I do recommend a melee that's nice and heavy, so you can get those quick and easy booms so that acolytes just go down and you don't have to think about it too much. In this case, I again am using my Quassus. I like it a lot. I think it's a lot of fun, and the extra heavy is really cool, but you could use something like the ceramic dagger or a slam build with your Magistar, stuff like that. All of those are options for you too. Now for this gameplay, I screwed up with my build selection. I actually selected my normal kind of spam heavy attack Quassus, but not the crescendo version. I don't recommend this build, but this is what I was running in the gameplay. If you don't know the Riven, it's a crit chance, crit damage minus attack speed. Feels pretty bad to just use this build basically, but if you just kind of shift it to something that looks a little more like this, it should feel just fine and work really, really well for just making sure Oraxia has an answer for whenever the acolytes spawn. Now, before we move on too far, I do just want to say, first off, shout out to my man Saminator for turning me on to the Convectrix. It's really, really fun on Oraxia, and I started building it because of his recommendation. Check him out if you haven't. He streams on Twitch, and I know that he's getting ready to do some YouTube stuff too, so please check out Saminator. Absolutely wonderful content creator. Love that man to death. Please show him some support. The other thing, though, that I got turned on recently to by a Twitch viewer was actually the Riot. That's the other weapon that I'm using in this video, this gameplay here. Now, the Riot has become immediately one of my most favorite secondaries in the game, and I'm going to be doing a full video for it coming up soon, so I won't talk about it too much here, but what I will say is that it works exceptionally well on Oraxia and any frames that can force proc statuses. So Oraxia can force proc her Toxin, it's going to force proc on impact, and then force proc again when the bullets recover back to the clip. What that means is that with multi-shot and stuff like that, you can easily stack up hundreds of Toxin procs on any enemies that can do that. So you won't be able to do it for things like Acolytes, things like Necromex, but you can do it for a lot of enemies in the game, and that's really, really fun and really strong, and it creates a really interesting interaction that I really like messing around with, but obviously, it does lose a little bit of power to Acolytes. For that, I run an Enervate build, and the build that I'm running on Oraxia today in the gameplay is right here. And like I said, I'll get into a full video for the Riot because I do think it deserves one coming up soon, but the basic Riven that I'm running is Fire Rate Multi-Shot. I find that to be the best combination. I don't have a negative yet, but I'll keep rolling and see if I can get one. Overall, I do have to say, Oraxia very quickly has become one of my favorite frames in the game. I have a really difficult time not playing her a lot on stream because she's just been so much fun to mess around with. I have a bunch of other frames that I want to get videos out for, but I thought it'd be remiss if I didn't show you guys this new build because I do think it's so much fun. I think it's so much fun because it really does capture everything I love about Mirage for the weapon platform she is, even going so far as to talk about aggro tanking, which Mirage kind of does as well. What that ends up meaning is that you get a very fun frame with a ton of answers to a lot of different types of questions that happen in the game. Survivability, damage, all that kind of stuff really does go a long way with how Oraxia plays. You can min-max her to the nth degree if you wanted to, or you can play just a very aggressive, very hyper-active build, and it's a lot of fun. Does she get the whole bonk thing till it goes still stuff that Mirage can do? Not really, and that's okay. I like the extra different type of playstyle, and it's a lot of fun. Overall, she's a really, really strong frame, and I do recommend you guys check her out. If you didn't like the previous build, or if you did like the previous build but want to try a very similar type of playstyle, honestly, this does play similarly. You don't have to worry too much about your survivability, because for the most part, you're handling that through the aggro tanking, going invisible when an acolyte spawns, or just generally being able to out-kill the enemies before they can set enough to be able to hurt you. It's very strong, it's very fun, and I really like the way it plays. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been Just Haley. You've been just amazing. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. It helps me out a ton. But until next time, do remember that I love your faces. Bye.